chapter that we read? I didn't bring
12.
that up. Chapter 12.
Yeah, and
History books versus historical fiction.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Which is something I hadn't really thought about before until this class. And it's funny because, like, everything that Tennille was saying was so true. Cause
oh, I know. Yeah.
like, history is my least favorite subject.
Same.
Totally.
I feel like in elementary school I just missed so many important facts that, like, now it's hard to piece them together to make sense of history when I'm learning in, like, college classes.
Yeah.
So I think that if I was reading books like Esmeralda Rising, it would have been a lot easier for me. So I thought it was so true.
Yeah, totally.
Like, I know some, sorry, I cut you
No,
off.
go ahead.
I was like, I know some people who are, like, history majors, and they're like, oh, I love history. I was like, really? I hate it.
Oh.
Like, it's really boring, and I can never get into it. And then, like, I was reading this chapter, I was like, it understands
Yeah,
me.
I know, right?
I was like, it really does. I'm not crazy.
Yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, no wonder I was so bored in these classes, because it was all, like, for me at least, like, rote memorization, because it was all, like, just dry, like, this happened on this date, then this happened, and it was like, I feel absolutely no connection to this whatsoever, and it's really boring, and, like, there's no reason for me to be invested in this, but, like, in reading Esperanza Rising, it was like I was able to make that connection, like, emotionally through the characters, and I feel like that's such an important part of learning, is having that incentive and having the information presented to you in a way that's, like, accessible, and it's not just, like, memorize this for a test, regurgitate it, like, that's it.
And, like, while reading Esperanza Rising, like, I kind of thought of, like, our AMST class textbook.
Yeah!
And, like, it's very much just, like, a lot of facts. And, like, there are these little blips where, like, you kind of focuses on this family, and then I'm like, yes, I'm engaged!
Right?
And then it's just, like, I lost it.
Yeah.
And so, like, I have to, like, read 20 pages, and it takes
or more.
forever.
Yeah.
But then, like, you read, like, this 200 whatever page book, and, like, granted, they're bigger fonts.
Yeah.
But, like, it just goes by so fast, and you're enjoying it, and I feel like you do just get a lot more out of it.
Yeah.
And you're just, like, connected, and you feel like it's something that you want to learn, and, like, just crave to know more about.
Yeah.
For sure.
When I was at the end of the book, I was like, wait, no. That's the end. So then I, like, read the afterword, like, all about the author and everything, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. I don't know if you guys got a chance to read it, but she was talking about how, like, her grandmother was the inspiration for the story, and how her mom's name is Esperanza, and that's where, like, she got the character's name from, and I was just like, oh, so cool. It was so cool. And, like, having that, like, real life connection to those characters, like, made the story even more real.
Totally.
You know?
Yeah. My dad taught at a different high school than the one that I went to, but same, like, school district, and at that school they offered a current world problems class for, like, a history class that you could take. You could either choose, like, U.S. history or current world problems, I think. I'm not really sure. But, and so my dad taught the CWP class, and I remember being like, oh, I wish they taught that at my school. Like, that sounds so much cooler. And he would, like, bring it home and, like, talk to me and my brother about it and stuff. And I was like, we're learning about the most boring stuff in class, because it had no connection to, like, what I was going through or anything, but all these other students got to learn about this stuff that was, like, really affecting them, and I was so jealous.
Yeah. And one of the things that I really liked about what Tennille talked about in chapter 12 was the idea of having texts come from different viewpoints, because I feel like I missed out on that so much, because my textbooks were based off of, like, basically the white Eurocentric view of what was happening, and I feel like there was so much more that could have been said from a different perspective, because you're seeing things through the eyes of the oppressors and not the oppressed in a lot of situations, and so it's hard to, like, really be invested in those things when you're not seeing, like, the real toll that these events take on people in history. And, like, with Esperanza and all of the like the fear that you're going to be deported, even if you're an American citizen and you've lived there all your life, just because you stand up for like wanting to have basic human rights, you know? So I thought that was really interesting, and in a lot of ways that really helped me connect that book to like what's going on right now in America and how a lot of Mexican workers are being treated still, because people will hire illegal immigrants, but then they won't give them the pay that they deserve or the conditions that they deserve, because they hold their status as an immigrant over their heads, and they say, well, you can either work for these conditions or we'll deport you and you won't be able to come back. And so, I don't know, I feel like making those connections, like if you did that as a teacher, it would be so much more meaningful for your students rather than being like, go to page blah 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 of your history textbook, let's read about another white guy going to another place and like doing that, and it's just like so boring.
So boring.
I like that he brings up how textbooks, like, students never question them because it's a textbook and they're never taught to like see things from a different point of view, and how having the story told from the perspective of a young protagonist. At first I was like, well, why do they have to be young? But for students to be able to hear about a story from the perspective of people who think just like them is really cool. And I think that writing historical fiction makes you feel like these things actually happen, because for me, I know that history is really important, but I'm like, okay, it happened, but that's really it. But when you read this, it's like, wow, this actually happened. And then to add to what you were saying, I worked in the food court at the mall, and this owner, one of the food places he got sued because he had so many undocumented citizens working for him, and he also owned like this housing thing. So they were like given such horrible conditions, but they were housed under his name. So then they couldn't do anything about it. But he got sued, and like everyone got a lot of money. And I was like, wow, this is happening 2 stores down from me.
Wow, that's crazy. So the court ruled like in favor of the undocumented people. That's awesome. Wow. That's cool.
I feel like you don't see enough of that happening, because I feel like our country is still so anti-immigrant, which is so ironic because this country was built on immigrants and the work of immigrants, that like it's hard to get people to see these human beings as human beings and not statistics, you know, or be like in fear of, oh, they're gonna take my job and like blah 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 blah, you know. Like it's important to have stories like this that really help you humanize the people that you're talking about. When you're talking about an immigrant, what are you talking about, you know?
Yeah.
And like
what's
this
their
is
story?
Yeah, exactly. Like they're a person too. They have like things that they're trying to do to make their lives better, and like they come to America so that they can work and have a good life and like maybe be able to achieve something more than they would in the country they came from, just like in the book. And like you're denying them that opportunity just because you're afraid.
Right. And I think it's really confusing too, like when I hear people talk about like undocumented people in our country, there's like a lack of understanding. It's like there's like, you've leaped so far to like come to these conclusions. It's like, have you even thought about why that person is here? What caused them to come here and like without papers? Like it's like they don't even consider or have those questions. It's really confusing. I don't understand it.
I think it was really interesting when they were talking about how, like in the fire, all of their like papers were burned, and like they were frantic because they're like, how are we gonna do this? And then like the sisters were able to get them copies and be able to help them in that way, because otherwise they wouldn't have been able to get out of that situation. Like the whole thing was so scary, like reading about like the uncles that are like so corrupt and they have control over the entire community. Like what are they gonna do? you know?
Right.
And so, like, you don't know what leads people to have to come to this country illegally.
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
maybe they don't have papers. Maybe they don't have the correct documents. Maybe they don't have the money that it costs, you know?
Yeah.
And it's unfair to assume that people are just coming here to, like, steal your jobs and whatever.
Because they're doing the jobs that no one in
Yeah,
your
exactly.
country do,
Yeah.
When I was reading this, I was kind of confused. Like, do you guys, like, in your perspective, do you think that he was saying that historical fiction books should replace history textbooks, or just like add to it?
I think add to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
He added alongside
Okay,
Yeah.
that's what I thought too, because like going back to our class, like I know after like we read the historical, like the Asian experience, it was like reading this book, there was kind of some similarities that like came with it, like the segregation of like all of the people. I was like, oh my gosh, that connects to what we read in there. And
Yeah.
it kind of very much like made it even more real, I guess.
Mhm.
Just like with the help of
Yeah.
that book.
Yeah, like having that as like a supplement to something that's more engaging, I think is great. But like if you really want to get kids to read and enjoy what they're reading, you have to have something that's engaging for them.
Mhm.
And having them read like textbooks with just fact after fact after fact and no emotional connection, like that's not going to be something they're interested in. A lot of adults are going to be interested in reading that. Like, they wouldn't spend their time doing that. So, I think, like, you're saying with that textbook, like, it's what saves it is, like, those stories that they have in there, like, real-life accounts of what was happening at that point. And, like, that's why I get really into those readings. But, like, just having all that information, like, one after the other is so boring.
Why do you think that like our public school doesn't typically add books like this, like historical fiction? Like, is it maybe because like there's so much to cover that we can't possibly fit in a book?
I think that's what it is. Because if you want to teach about all the topics that are in a history textbook, then you have to read so much historical fiction in 1 year. And then, I mean, you could integrate it throughout literacy, but then there are certain things you need to get done in literacy.
Yeah, that's true.
And like with the idea that when I was saying like a good historical fiction book like needs to just have like a small amount of facts in there, like you would have to read so many.
Yeah.
And that takes even more time.
Right.
Yeah. I feel like another issue, like I'm just gonna put this out there, that we have with the way that we teach history is it's like quantity over quality. And it's like we have to cover everything in this span of time. And that's just, well, for one thing, it's not like achievable because you can't cover every single topic in 1 year.
Right.
And like that's not going to work. So I like how schools have, like I remember in high school, I don't know how your guys' high schools worked, but mine was like Pacific Northwest history for like freshman year, and then second year we had like world history and things like that. And I think that's like a good way to structure it because then you're focusing on like different aspects of like the community you live in and then like the bigger picture. And I think it would be interesting to look at those through different viewpoints though, because I know when I had classes on like those different like subjects, it was always from like a white person's perspective.
Right.
And I feel like that's such a boring thing to have. It's just like one person's viewpoint. Because that's not accurate. That's not historically accurate, and it's not realistic, like you were just saying. And like, yeah, it's just, it doesn't tell the whole story. And I feel like if we really want to teach people history, we have to tell them the things that went down. Because like, if you ignore that, then that takes the whole purpose of history away.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that was one of the things that really resounded with me in like, chapter 12 was when he was talking about like, you have to tell it like it is. Like if you're gonna say it, you have to tell it like it is. Like you can't just sugarcoat everything, basically. Like it has to be the truth. And I feel like that's so hard because we live in such a like politically correct society, and in a lot of ways like political correctness is awesome and it's great, but like there's so many things that are taboo because we're afraid of facing the fact that like America has done so many terrible things to people. And, like, it's not like this, like, rainbows and sunshine country that people make it out to be. So
Right.
I just think it's important to confront that because, like, no one's perfect. No one has a perfect history, and that's the point, you know?
Yeah. I think I might have already talked to you guys about this before, but like I grew up in Puyallup and I lived there my entire life, and I had no idea that Puyallup was a tribe until I got to college. No one told me that
Wow.
until I got to college and I saw a list of tribes in Washington State, and Puyallup was on there, and I was like, oh.
Yeah.
Like, wow. And now I'm like, I get like heated up about it and stuff because I'm like, why didn't anyone tell me about the history of where I was from? I thought like, oh, the Puyallup Fair is our history. Like, what?
Which that in itself is problematic because it was
of
where
the Japanese
because of
Americans.
the Japanese Americans.
And no one talked about that
No.
until I got to high school. No one told me that. And anyway, I just think it's really important to like teach, like we were saying, teach both sides of history so that people aren't blindsided when they finally learn about it.
Yeah.
Did you guys ever read that or have any of the American Girl dolls?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Oh,
Yeah.
books, like the activity books.
This is what like that chapter made me think of because I loved Kit Kittredge, one of the American Girl dolls. I think because she looked like me as a little kid, and so I was like, oh my gosh, like this is me, like I can relate to her. And she was like during like the Great Depression, and I like read all of her books. I went to like an author's like book signing, like I was obsessed, and I kind of wish that like my teacher would have like had like some of that in her classroom or whatever because it made me excited about history.
Yeah.
And I could tell you like anything about the Great Depression now because
Yeah.
I read like all her books. It was awesome.
Yeah, I had Nellie, and I remember like that was one of the ways that like it made history like accessible to me was like through this doll and like through the books that they had that went along with them. And I feel like why aren't we tapping into that? Like there's this whole series of them, and I'm sure the libraries at school have them, and like I don't know, it gives you this like protagonist to like it's again with like the young protagonist to see the side of the story through.
Yeah. Have you guys been to the Alderwood Mall?
Yes.
There's a huge American doll.
Yeah.
store.
Oh my
It's so big, and
That's
girls can
awesome.
have parties and like choose their dolls to sit with them at dinner.
Oh, that's so cute.
It's like bizarre how big it is.
That's so funny. Oh my gosh.
Off topic, my mom was like super sad like when it finally came because we were too old.
Oh.
And it was like in DC or somewhere when it like actually was there. She was like, we should fly there.
And
then,
you were like,
and then it finally came to Alderwood, and she was like, you guys are too old.
Have you been inside?
I have actually.
Okay.
like I had dinner there with my dog.
Whatever.
That was very awkward.
You want to talk about Crossing Black Cheeto? Okay, so I looked up some stuff about the authors, and this is where the whole like insider outsider, you know, like I get really confused by that still because so Tim Tingle, the author, is a member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, but I think this story was written about the Choctaw Nation of a different state. I don't remember what state, but it was like a Choctaw Nation in a different state. And then the author or the illustrator is not a member of a tribe, but she has she has like Cherokee ancestry, which is not the same as like the Choctaw Nation. Anyway, so I get really confused about if this is appropriate because they're not insiders of the specific tribe. I don't know.
I suppose like I'm just guessing here. Like they could have like two different factions of the Choctaw tribe or more than that, because like I know when the Europeans came over, like a lot of people got split up because there was like mass genocide and things like that. So like I think people just kind of went where they could survive or where they got rounded up and put. So
That's true.
I might have been too picky, but when I read that, after reading about the Cherokee Princess and the last week or 2 weeks
Yeah,
ago,
that was last week,
I was
yeah.
like, well, are they actually?
yeah.
I don't know. I just think there's no way to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And no, I totally thought that too, because this girl is just of Cherokee ancestry, and you know how last week I told you that I was supposed to be of Cherokee ancestry, which who knows at this point.
Yeah.
But now I'm like, okay, well maybe she's not either, so who knows?
Yeah.
Reading about him, he seems super involved, though.
Yeah, he
and
does.
he interviewed some Choctaw Nation
Tribal leaders or elders.
yeah, elders to like get the story.
Yeah.
Which I was
And
like,
it was actually in too.
Yeah.
the one thing that I didn't like at the end, I think I mentioned this. in
Yeah, I
my-
remember that.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
It's just,
But maybe the white people tell it best.
See, I feel like the way
Yeah.
I read that, I almost read it like in like a really sarcastic way.
I think
Like, that's
yeah,
how I
that's
read
that's
it.
how I read
Like
it
it was
too.
like, this is how we did it,
Yeah.
and this is how they did it. But you know, the whites tell it best.
Yeah.
Because it's like, you know, like they were like the ghosts or whatever they were
Yeah.
described as.
Okay.
And so like
Yeah.
that's how I read it in my perspective, but I don't know.
yeah,
if
that's a
was-
good
Yeah.
interpretation. I like that
Yeah.
better.
Yeah.
Like I don't know if that's right or
Yeah,
anything.
no, that's how I read it
Okay.
too. It's like an insider-outsider perspective. Like that's how I saw it. Was like the white people, because they're on the outside of this, they didn't really
Yeah,
know what was
they-
going on.
Yeah.
So like this is the way they tell the story, but like they don't know this part of the story,
Yeah.
which was like, you know, this is the part that we know. And I thought it kind of like added some more like how do I say it, like solidarity to it, I guess, like that that bonding between these two like minority groups at the time, and how
They kind of just connected.
yeah,
with
they
each
just
other.
connected with each other, and how this became a shared story
Yeah.
between these two like groups of people. And that's so much. It was so cool.
know,
The
yeah.
illustrations were like
Okay, the way you described the illustration, I think you called them haunting.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I
like
I've
yeah.
been staring at you.
Yeah.
See, I don't know if you guys read my post because I posted it really late. But I had read this book like first, like I just flipped through the pictures and I was just looking at them and I was so confused by this book because I was just looking at the pictures and I was like, oh my gosh, this is another book about poems and like each of these people staring at you
Yeah.
is like a person about a poem.
Yeah.
And then I kept going and I was like, these faces are similar, so it's not different people.
Yeah.
And so I was like, maybe they're talking to you. And like, I couldn't get a feel for it just because, like, I'm not used to these kind of books where they're just staring at you. Their
Yeah.
emotions are so raw. It's like,
Yeah.
none of them,
Yeah.
yeah. It was just like, it was super raw. And then I read through it and I was like, this is not what I thought at all.
Yeah.
And I was like, when you said haunting things, I was like, that's what I was looking for. Like,
Yeah.
I've never really seen illustrations like that.
Yeah, me
Where
neither.
emotions are just so raw. and,
Yeah.
like,
It was really
Yeah.
interesting, like, because, like, as a human being, like, having that connection of looking into someone else's face is so important. I felt like it really helped you to, like, see those characters and, like, really connect on that emotional level that the story was trying to convey.
And at first, I almost wanted to say that there wasn't any emotion in their faces. I was like, when I was just looking through it, I was like, they're just staring at me.
Yeah.
But then, like, when you read the text, like, you realize there's a lot of emotion in
Yeah.
there.
Sorry, I keep bringing up Mexico, but do you remember those murals? The,
From-
like giant ones next to the convent with the history. Ones with like the really big murals, and the illustrations are just like this.
Were they? I don't
I'll show you later.
Okay.
And I don't know why I didn't like this book I don't think it's that I didn't like it, but I read it like immediately after Esperanza Rising, so then I was kind of bored because I was like so caught up in that I felt like a lot was missing, but I think it would have been different if I gave it some time after reading it. But it was just interesting to see how much that changed it for me, like after reading it, I suppose.
Yeah.
I read this one first, so I don't know if that
Okay.
was different.
One of the things that I noticed in this book, and it was actually in the questions from the article online, was like you were supposed to ask students like why were the people actually invisible?
Yeah.
Like I don't know how I would answer that because like I was confused by that in the book, honestly.
Yeah.
Like I didn't quite get why people weren't seeing them if they just like I don't know if it was really like they weren't walking too fast, weren't walking too slow. They just stared at the ground and like I didn't quite fully understand that.
Yeah.
Like why they were just invisible to people.
I think that's like a folktale thing, though.
Okay.
It's like a pretty like reoccurring theme where it's like you don't know if it's magic or if it's real, and kind of that like bridge between the two, and how like they were. If you think about it, it's talking about how like social classes don't see the people that they consider to be like inferior. That's what I got out of it.
Yeah.
At least I
Okay.
don't know.
That was like this. There was like a second part of that question. I think that it was like, what does this say about people who we think are inferior?
Yes,
to us, or something along those lines.
Yeah.
And so that led me to be like, oh, maybe we don't see them as they're inferior or whatever. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think that's more of it. Kind of like a symbolic kind of thing. I really liked how we've talked about before, like looking at people that are other like races and seeing like are they all depicted like as like the same way, or do they all have their unique features? And so I was like really looking at that and stuff, and like they totally all have like unique features. Like you can see. Me too. Like this whole thing of his beard and stuff. Like you can, and like I really like this one with the 3 Native American men. Oh, right here, and they totally all 3 like are so different. I don't know. I really liked that. So I thought the illustrations were done super well.
I just like got caught up in them. It was almost hard to like flip the page to read the rest of it because I was like, oh, I would just want to stare at these.
What were all of your years and
So long ago. I think for this one, my mirror was I kind of feel like this little girl. Relate to it because I want to help everybody, and I want to be like a social justice advocate, and I feel like she was like doing that with her friends and stuff. And I think I did something super corny in my post. I made it super metaphorical. Like I will lead my children or my students across the lake with the stones that I see and they know, or whatever. It was super. It was late. I was done reading. I feel
you get caught up in writing.
Yeah, you do. That happened to me after reading this book. Like, I just felt like I was feeling so many emotions that I like put it all down, and I even had like longer posts for this than I think I did for Esperanza Rising, even though that was like a longer story with like more meat to it, because like when I read it, I was just like so struck by the story and how like interesting it was to me to see like these different characters interacting with one another, and these like very different experiences of like the mom telling her, you know, don't go across the river because that's where the slaves are, and you know, you don't want to like get caught up in that, and having that separation of the river between them. And like to me that was kind of a metaphor because like you're like bringing these two people together, you know, across the river. And Yeah, I just thought that was so cool. And I was like, I hope this story is real, but I don't know if it is. I don't think it is. I think it's just based on like a true story or something. But I don't know. I saw myself in the Martha Tom, is that her name? Yeah. And mine was for a different reason because I thought that
What?
like,
You didn't see yourself?
yeah, no, that it's not that. It's like, in kind of having that adventurous spirit and wanting to kind of push past like the barriers that your parents set for you, and then like finding new experiences because of that. And I thought it was interesting because both of these books had a protagonist that was like a young female, and I think like that made it easier to connect in a lot of ways because like I can remember being younger and like having those same like feelings of like wanting to push those boundaries or like wanting to like basically feel comfortable and not have to like push yourself like in Esperanza Rising when she's just like, now I have to work, like what do I do? Like I've never worked before, and like having those types of experiences that like you're either pushing yourself to do something that is like out of your comfort zone, or like other people, like other events in your life are like pushing you to do that. I don't know, that's the main thing.
One thing that I just thought of when you said both of these books have like young protagonist females is like, maybe this is because I was a girl growing up and like I wanted the protagonist to like be able to like, I wanted to relate to them, so maybe I picked more girl books, but I feel like there are just more like girl books in like literacy anyway, and so do you like, I don't know, do you think maybe that's why guys don't really like to read as much as girls do?
I mean, like, is that like a generalization, like that you've noticed that, or is it like statistically they?
I don't know. I'm just noticing it just now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a good question. Like, that's a really good observation, actually. Now that I think about it, and I wonder if it's because, you know, there's a huge movement towards having like female empowerment and having people from like all different cultures having like the female protagonists in the stories because they're stories that were so often neglected historically because we have those history books that are written from a white male perspective because like males were the dominant members of society and still continue to be. And so I think that's probably part of it. But also I'm wondering if like there's something about our culture and how unresponsive we are to men having feelings, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like preserving that sense of masculinity and not being able to have kind of live that shared experience through emotions because of that like stereotype that men are like they don't really think about their emotions and stuff like that. So I think that's a good question for us is like looking at like why are there so many young female protagonists and why aren't there more male, or are there and we just are more exposed to the like young female protagonists?
I'm trying to think of books that I read throughout high school and elementary school, and I feel like a lot of them were guys, so maybe that was just a different thing for me. But you said that you were more drawn to female characters, so maybe it's books we choose versus books that were required.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah.
The only book I'm thinking of right now that I read in high school is The Great Gatsby. That's like the only book I can think of right now.
And even that, like, it was written in a time, like, it still wasn't expressing a lot of emotion. Like, the main character is just the narrator, basically, for the story.
Yeah.
And, I know, like, one of the ways I connected to what you just said is, like, the absolute true diary of Clark Indian, or absolutely true diary of Clark Indian. And, like, that had a male protagonist in it. And I feel like there are a lot of stories that are told through a male perspective, but I wonder if they're just told in a different way. And so, like, as females, like, we can connect to the female protagonists more when we're drawn to those stories, like you were saying. Like, I wonder, like, just makes me think about that.
Yeah, you're right. But I guess thinking about it now, it's a lot of just narration about male protagonists and not really from their actual perspective.
Yeah.
It's funny how you just don't remember, right?
Yeah.
And then in the LF 401 class, that group, are you reading Boy Writers?
Yeah.
And so there's like a whole book dedicated to like getting boys to write. Like, are they reading more than they write, or are they reading not as like, or I don't know, because I feel like those kind of go hand in hand. Like, guys don't want to write because they don't want to write about their emotions, but they really want to read about their emotions. That kind of thing. I don't know.
So, like, how much do our social perceptions of like the ways that males and females like interact with the world, how much does that affect like literature and like the audience that it is basically catering to, you know?
Runner is, I guess I kind of saw my family in the river and how like crossing the river meant it was their way to freedom. And when my dad and his family escaped from Cambodia, like right as they heard about the Khmer Rouge, fortunately, they crossed over to Thailand, and that was like their first step to freedom. And I mentioned how it was like a family friend from Thailand who was willing to do this, and then in the book it was Martha Tom's family, a whole different culture, and how they just came together like this. And when you have these different cultures, sometimes you think you're so different, but when you form a bond with an individual person, like basic human rights becomes way more important.
My mirror was kind of Little Moses.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because it's short for Moses.
Yeah. Okay. I kind of related to him when they were at dinner and they found out his mom was being sold, to another person, and he was just like, no, we can do this. Like, he had that idea of not wanting to give up. And I kind of saw myself like that when I was little. Like when we would go through like a lot of hard times, and we were just like, okay, what do we do? I was always like this first, like, this little girl, like, we can do this. And like, it kind of reminded me of that one book. I think it was first week that we had a post. I had like the fancy game.
Oh yeah.
Or no, it wasn't that one. I lied. It was it was the one where the little boy, like they were just like, oh, you're a kid, you don't know anything. Oh, which one was that?
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
But anyways, it was just like that perspective of because you're a kid, like you don't really like. We're not
The one, the Christopher Columbus.
Yeah. Okay.
The way he like imagined birds.
Yeah.
It started with a V. I feel like it started with a V.
Yeah. But
I know what you're talking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyways, it reminded me of that, of how like sometimes you're just disregarded as a kid, but like sometimes kids do have a deeper understanding that sometimes adults don't see. And in the book, like his dad really took the kid's advice, and like sometimes it kind of went off topic with my mirror. I was like, just like sometimes as adults, we kind of need to see the perspective of the child and like really be like, is this just like something that it's a child's perspective, or like this is something really important and it's valued. So.
Well, kids have all of these raw curiosities that we lose as we grow up. And
Yep.
we're taught to think a certain way for so long that we just lose it. And it's like when kids are curious about something or they have a certain perspective, you should really value it because it's fresh and it has been untouched by society.
Yeah.
So important.
That's what I was thinking when we were talking about were they really invisible? I was like, okay, if you asked a kid that, like half the room would be like, oh yeah, they were totally invisible, and the other half would be like, oh no, they weren't invisible,
Yeah.
But because kids like have that imagination and don't really understand, like. But they
don't know.
They would be like totally. They're invisible, like
And then the really interesting thing is asking them, how do you know that? or why? And then they come up with these like ingenious explanations of like, but then it relates to like the metaphor of being invisible. It's like, oh my god, kids are blowing my mind. Yeah.
So crazy.
I think mine was Little Mo, like looking through his perspective because I talked about like my parents getting divorced and how like that was a chosen separation of a family, but how his mother was going to be like sold to a different like slave owner, and how like that was going to be like a forced separation, and looking at the privilege aspect of that, especially like, I mean, obviously it would have been more apparent then, but like now, like comparing my family to his family, like his family was living in a time of slavery as Black people when they were like basically considered property, and like me as a white middle class person in my family like choosing to separate, like it's just interesting to look at those different dynamics and like the choice in that, and how that like affects the relationship that you have to that separation, because it's like it's almost considered okay when it's a choice, but when it's not a choice, I mean obviously it's not okay, but you know it's just interesting. But it got me thinking about that. I don't know why.
Mine was definitely like that same spot in the book, but it was more like just the idea that you could be sold. Like that was like a complete window. It was like the father and the mother were like super devastated in the book, but it was like, guess what? She's sold. Like it was like they accepted it, and just like that idea that you have to accept that you are property and that you are sold. And you're just gonna be stripped from your family. Like that's like a crazy idea.
Yeah, it was like it's their normal. Like they didn't have any conception of anything else. They didn't have any idea that they could all be like that. I forget what I wrote. Do you see what I wrote? I think I said something along the lines of slavery too, just like they've never been told that I can't go somewhere or I can't do something. You can like say it. Oh yeah. I said my mother taken away from me. I couldn't imagine being told that my mom was no longer going to be a part of my family. I feel like your mom is so like, she's like the calming force of your family. At least she is in my family. Like she's like the one that like calms everybody down and like brings everyone together and stuff. And so I feel like if she were gone, like we'd all be a mess. Like,
that's really funny because it's like the opposite dynamic in my family. So like it was really weird when my dad left because my mom had to be like both mom and dad, which is such a strange place to like be in. Like I can't even imagine like trying to like feed both of those like necessities. Like my dad was always the one like that was like very emotionally supportive, and my mom was like the practical one. Like like these are the rules, these are the way you follow the rules. Like I have these expectations of you, and like she's fiercely loving, but she's like very she has high expectations, and I think like that's a great thing. But then like I feel like in my adolescence I also missed out on a lot of like the emotional support that I needed because my dad did leave. So like having that separation of like a family, like it's just, it just feels wrong. You know what I mean? Like it's just like this weird space to be in of like how do you live without those like those different perspectives and those different ways of like going about life, you know, that you're so used to. It's really interesting.
Do you remember your
I know that I couldn't identify with being a slave. Specifically, I think I just extended on all that comes with slavery and not being able to cross the river, not talk always being in fear of something being taken away.
What I almost put on there was I can imagine some like having to go out into the middle of the woods to like practice my religion. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like white people back then had churches to do that.
Yeah.
Slaves just went out to the middle of the woods or wherever they
Yeah.
could and like
Yeah.
practiced their religion. Like, it's so crazy.
And there have been so many times in history where that's been true, like people being enslaved by other people, like the Egyptians enslaving the Israelites and you know things like that. And there's so many different like connections that you can see in societies like throughout time. This goes back to the whole history thing and looking at history from different perspectives. And that was something really interesting. I didn't think about that before.
Yeah.
Like the faith aspect of it, because that was a big part of it. Because she said like she continued to like worship with them and everything, and
Yeah.
like
Sorry, I just had a random thought. That was one of the questions in there.
Wasn't it?
It was her family Christian?
Oh yeah.
And I was like, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's such a good question.
Well, her family had, I don't know if it was like cultural religion though, but like
Yeah.
when they did like those dances and sang those songs, I don't know if
Yeah.
that was their culture or if that was their religion.
It could be
I'm-
both.
okay.
You know, because like they go hand in hand in a lot of ways, especially when you have a culture that's like built around certain beliefs. And I know like from what I know about Native American cultures, which is probably like minuscule, like microscopic, as opposed to like the big picture of it. Like that's a big part of how people in the tribe are like brought together is through like religious ceremonies and things like that. And I know that's still the case today. Like people still practice religion in tribal events and things like that. So
I want to touch on Esperanza Rising since it's a big topic.
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
My mirror for this was I read the little summary cover on the inside of the cover, and when my dad's family crossed over to Thailand, so my dad's family in Cambodia, they, his dad, or my grandpa, was a really big leader in the government, and my dad didn't like that, obviously, so
Yeah.
they had to leave, and they had like everything in Cambodia, and when they came to America, they had $20, like had to restart a whole new life. My dad lost his mom when he was like 10, so just immediately I was so emotionally connected to
Yeah.
this, and I think it made me really sad hearing about this book's experience and how I learned so much, but that's literally one story out of millions for people of all cultures, and it
Yeah.
made me realize that no matter how much my family tells me, I will never understand what my own parents went through.
Yeah.
So I really like reading this book.
Well, mine here wasn't as, in the heart. But, oh my gosh. Mine here was just kind of, there was a quote like, Miguel, or I think he kept saying when he was like, we're just on two different sides of the river.
Yeah.
It kind of like really connected with me, and like, it wasn't so much like money-wise, like how she was rich and he was like poor. Like for me, it wasn't so much that, but like growing up, I kind of saw that a lot. Like if I thought someone was like better at me than something, I was like, oh, they're just so much further away. Or I gave like so many examples, but for me personally, it was kind of just like my sister was that person. Like she was like totally on the other side of that river. Like she had everything that I thought like a teenage girl was supposed to have. And so I think that kids, like when they hear that, they can think of like so many different aspects of what it could mean to them.
Yeah.
And so, but towards the end of the book, like I don't know if they actually like got together, but like I kind of envisioned that because they held hands and I thought it'd be beautiful. But
Yeah.
putting that aside,
I should that.
okay, putting that aside, like towards the end of the book, I kind of felt like they realized that no matter like if you are on one side or the other, you're still gonna like have the same like emotions that you can have. So I kind of narrowed it down to like either in their perspective or like anyone's. You can either think of it doesn't matter if we're on different sides of the river, or like we can all just be on one side of the river, or the river just doesn't exist. And so, like looking back at my life, it was just kind of like interesting to perceive it that way. And so I thought that was interesting.
My mirror in this was I saw so much of myself in her throughout the book because she was so like adamant, like we're not poor, like this is not happening. Like every time my mom would say like we're poor, she would be like no, and like not in that aspect, but like just I remember my parents trying to tell me stuff over and over when I was a kid, and I'd be like no.
I know this, you don't.
Not true. And then, like, weeks later, I'd be like, it's true. But, this is a weird example, but I remember when I was moving from my first home that I lived in, I had a friend that I was, like, really close with that lived in that neighborhood, and my parents were like, okay, well, you probably, like, you'll stay in touch, but, like, you won't be as close, because, like, you'll, and I was like, no, I'm going to see her every single day. And this was just like one example of that. But we don't communicate now. Like I haven't seen her in years, and now looking back on that, I'm like, okay, my parents were trying to prepare me, but I wasn't listening. And I feel like just in that sense, like she had to learn it on her own.
Yeah.
And like no matter like what anyone tells you, you kind of have to just like go through those things. And
Yeah.
learn it.
I feel like the emotional journey is what like I really like connect between your story and like and Esperanza Rising, just because like she's going through that denial because she's trying to preserve herself because so many traumatic things have happened in her life that she's like not able to process it even. Like so many things have been like upturned, like her whole way of living was completely like just changed. And I mean I think one of my mirror was like confronting privilege. And I think that she was kind of forced to do that through this like life change that happened to her. And how like looking at the privileges that she had as a person, like I thought it was interesting how they said like her ancestors came from Spain, and thinking about like Spain and the conquest of like Mexico and all the like factors of like imperialism and like colonialism and things like that go into like those relationships between different people, and like being a light-skinned person. I think Miguel talked about it too in this story, and he like tried to point out these things to her, but she was like totally adamant that like no, you don't understand. And I think towards the end of the book, like what you were saying about like them like coming closer together, and I think they ended up together honestly, because like she said for a fact, like this was in the book, that Miguel was based off of her grandpa. So, and obviously they ended up together. So I'm just like I'm leaving it at that. I'm just gonna say yeah, it happened. But I think it was interesting, like the whole like metaphor of the river, and well, now that I think about it, there were two metaphors.
I noticed
in
that.
both books.
I noticed that when I'm writing it.
left. Yeah. So like looking at that and how at the end of the story she's using this like really huge emotional experience that she had with her father and sharing that with Miguel, and like somebody who she considered to be like lesser than before, even though like they got along and everything, she was still like taught through society like you're better than him, so like don't associate with him. And like having that all overturned, like I can't even imagine. Like, yeah. So I don't know. I thought it was interesting.
Okay, I don't know what's really
Yeah.
Through my window, I read about how her uncles were so corrupt, and I just could
Yeah.
never imagine my family, who's like my everything, just being worried that they're going to sabotage me or put me in danger or set my house on fire. Like,
Yeah.
and I think the question, or one of the questions was that but just thinking about how some families are corrupt like that, and some people do have to worry about their uncles who live with them or whatever.
Yeah.
I was just so mind blown. I was like, her uncle, like, they set her house on fire. And
this really should have been my mirror, because like I totally have an uncle like that. Like he didn't set my house on fire.
I was gonna say.
But when my grandma passed away, he sued my mom and my aunt for undue influence because like he wasn't happy with the will.
Oh my gosh.
And like we lived in the same neighborhood, and like we didn't speak to him for like years and stuff. And like I don't know why I didn't connect to this before, maybe because I like try and like forget about it. Like I don't really see him as like my uncle anymore. And this was like years ago, but that's totally my mirror. Yeah.
Wow. Crazy. Yeah, it's scary to see how family members can treat each other and things like that. Like times when you really need to like bond together as a family and like connect emotionally, but like from like what Esperanza was like narrating, it seems like they weren't those type of people. Like they were very focused on themselves and on their position in society, and their only connection to her father was that like they were brothers, and that like there wasn't a real like I guess there weren't a lot of similarities between the way that her father acted and how he treated other people and her uncles did. So
I think one of like the biggest like takeaways from that experience that I like took away was that like no matter how you parent, like you could parent 3 kids the exact same way, and each one of them could turn out so different, and 2 of them could set the other one's house on fire, and like you know what I mean? Like they could just turn out so different. Like no matter like it's like part of me wants to say, well, like oh you didn't parent that well or whatever, but it's kind of up to the kid who wants what she wants to turn out to be.
And because like I read the reading for next week for this week, and I was really that was actually kind of like one of my mirrors. Like I have like 3 older siblings, and they're like nothing like me, and so like it's just like very much like that. Like you can do it like all the same, and like it's just completely different.
It turns out so
Or
some like you know there's like those random like bad kids in your town. You know what I mean? Like do you know what I'm talking about? Like they were raised by like really good people, but you're like, what happened to them? You know, like that sounds so messed up, but you know what I mean? Sorry. Like, and then their siblings are like perfectly fine. You know, it's kind of like up to the person. Sometimes.
It's all like about individual experience. And, like, that changes people. Like you don't know like what went on in that person's life, right?
I mean, it's also like how you take it too, because like you can have 2 kids, like twins, like going at the same experience at the same exact time, but they could still turn out
Totally different.
The way that they interpret it could be so different.
That's true. I know. Wow.
Crazy talks tonight, guys.
A lot of big picture stuff. Do we have any other like money questions about the story that we want to talk about? Or
is this the class that we have to have 3 or at least 1?
it's always one, but 3 is preferred. Yeah, she would prefer 3. I'm sure with all of our insight these books, we can come up with one or two more.
Maybe we could talk about these people. Like where they
Yeah.
I thought we already had that.
Well, we talked about like how.
Oh, the young people.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay. But that would be a good one, talking about like how do you know if someone's actually an insider in the culture, because it's so hard to tell sometimes. Like it says that he's like a part of the Choctaw Nation and everything, but it's like, how much are you involved with this? And it seems like he did a lot of really great research and everything, but it's like how, like what is the extent to like your relationship with this story and like with the people that you're talking about?
Yeah, another thing that made me wonder is that he said he interviewed the elders, but he didn't really talk to his family.
Yeah.
So I feel like if he was really, I don't know why I keep thinking that it's just not actually a part of it. I don't know why.
Your trust is just like totally broken with everyone.
I'm sure he
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe another money question. Why do we doubt that this guy is a part of the Choctaw Nation? Well, I mean, okay. If you look at him, like, I'm just gonna be 100% honest here. When I looked at him, I was like, is this a white guy writing about, like, a Native American story? And I was like, that just seems messed up. But then I'm like, you know what? That's, like, my own personal, like, conception of who this person is based on their appearance. That's wrong. But also, like, when you're first looking at someone, like it or not, you're gonna have those assumptions. It's how you deal with those assumptions that's important. So, like, how do you confront that and like figure out like how much do I dig into this person's background to determine whether or not they are like suitable to write this piece, you know? And like, is it okay for them to not be a part of that culture? You know, I feel like that's just like something that we've been talking about a lot. It's like we don't know. Oh man, that would be bad. Well, I think after the whole Rachel Dolezal discussion we had, like that just broke everyone's trust with everybody. Like, oh man.